The grand halls of the Gerak capital ship gleamed under soft, alien lights that shimmered like liquid silver. Every surface reflected the meticulous order of the Empire, the precision of centuries of tradition and power. The corridors were wide and imposing, and the air carried a faint hum, the resonance of engines beyond comprehension. At the heart of it all sat the throne room, a vast chamber where the alien Queen Xylar held court, her presence both magnificent and terrifying. Her scales shimmered in hues of deep violet and green, each movement deliberate, commanding respect and fear alike. The court bowed to her every word, and her advisors, sleek and sharp-eyed, anticipated her desires almost before they were voiced. Today, however, was different. A formal gathering had been called, a congregation of delegates from multiple star systems, all eager to witness the Queen's decree on an emerging interstellar treaty. Ships from distant worlds hovered outside the docking bay, their flags and insignias strange to human eyes, yet carrying an undeniable weight. The throne room was crowded with Gerak nobles, ministers, and diplomats, their postures rigid, their expressions unreadable to outsiders. In a corner, standing slightly apart, was Jackson Cole, a human guard assigned to the Queen. His uniform, though simple, bore the insignia of the High Security Corps, a mark of trust and responsibility. But humans were often underestimated here. Jackson knew that the court did not see him as a being of equal value. To them, he was a curiosity, a creature of simple biology and fleeting ingenuity. He did not mind. Observation, patience, and quiet determination had always been his tools. Today, those tools might be the difference between life and death. The Queen ascended her dais with the grace of centuries of training, her claws clicking lightly against the polished floor. Her advisors moved like shadows around her, ensuring every protocol was perfect. Delegates murmured politely, adjusting their ceremonial garb, while the medics stationed discreetly along the walls checked their instruments. Jackson's eyes, trained to notice what others overlooked, scanned the room. The subtle tremor in the food preparation trays, the almost imperceptible shifts in air currents, the nervous flutter in a junior minister's wings. Everything mattered. Nothing escaped his notice. Humans had survived against impossible odds for thousands of years, and it was precisely because of this kind of vigilance that Jackson carried himself with a quiet confidence the aliens could not comprehend. Then it happened. A sharp intake of breath cut through the ritualized hum of the assembly. The Queen's chest shuddered. A collective gasp echoed in the chamber as her clawed hands clawed at her chest. Her eyes, normally so piercing and controlled, widened in shock. She toppled forward, supported barely by the armrests of her throne. The medics surged forward, their elongated limbs moving in synchronized panic, but even they hesitated. No creature under the Gerak Empire's care had ever collapsed like this. Their instruments screamed warnings, lights flickering red with unfamiliar urgency. The Queen's body convulsed and her breath became shallow, erratic. A heart attack. But how? In a species that prided itself on perfect physiology, trained medics, and centuries of genetic engineering, such a thing should not have happened. Not here, not now. Chaos erupted. Ministers shouted over one another, their voices sharp and alien, while the delegates froze, unsure if this was a ceremonial display they did not understand or a catastrophic failure. Jackson moved closer, not out of curiosity but necessity. His training kicked in, instincts sharpened by years of human adaptability. He scanned the Queen for any sign of external cause, poison, weapon, or unnatural interference, but saw nothing. No spiked vessels, no altered instruments, no trembling advisor that betrayed guilt. Only the Queen, writhing in agony, surrounded by creatures who had no idea how to save her. "Stand back," Jackson said firmly, his voice cutting through the din. The medics hesitated, their compound eyes narrowing. They were superior in technology, faster and stronger than any human, yet here he was, the outsider, speaking with authority they could not ignore. They had no alternative, and the Queen's life hung in the balance. Jackson knelt beside her throne, careful to avoid touching her, noting her breathing, her pulse, the rhythm of her convulsions. His mind worked rapidly. Humans could not heal the Queen, but they could understand what was happening when the Gerak scientists could not. And understanding in situations like this was often the first step to survival. The medics administered a series of treatments, injections, and energy pulses. Red lights flashed, alien instruments hummed in frantic cadence, yet the Queen remained unstable. Jackson studied her face and body language, the subtle tremor in her jaw, the way her claws clenched, the faint sheen of sweat on her scales. These were signals the medics overlooked, too focused on the instruments and protocols. He realized the Queen's response was physical but not caused by disease or attack. Something else, something invisible, was at work. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The court watched, paralyzed. And then Jackson noticed a detail so small it almost escaped him. The Queen had tensed just as he had stepped closer to observe, and her breathing had changed when he adjusted his position. A human's presence? Impossible. It defied everything the aliens knew about biology, yet he had no other explanation. Humans could do strange things to unpredictable systems, he thought. Sometimes we survived by exploiting weaknesses others could not even imagine existed. Perhaps the same principle was at work here unintentionally. He decided to step back slightly, giving her space. Slowly, her convulsions lessened. The medics noted improvement but could not explain it. Jackson's eyes narrowed. He would need to study this, to understand it fully, before the Queen faced another crisis. Observation alone would not suffice. He would need to analyze patterns, behaviors, and interactions that the aliens dismissed as irrelevant. Humans had learned to survive in chaos because they noticed what others did not, adapted when others could not, and thought independently when others followed blindly. Jackson realized that in the heart of the Xerac Empire, these qualities might save a life that no protocol, no technology, and no centuries of tradition could. Once the immediate crisis passed, the Queen was moved to a secure chamber, guarded by the medics and surrounded by her most trusted advisors. Jackson remained outside, ostensibly to protect the perimeter, but really to observe. The aliens had no idea that a human could see things in ways they could not. Every gesture, every breath, every moment held a clue. The Queen had survived the attack, but the mystery remained. Was it something she had eaten? Something in the environment? Or was it something far stranger? Jackson did not yet know, but he felt a flicker of understanding that the aliens could not. Humans had always been outsiders, underestimated and disregarded. Yet in that moment, his species' greatest trait, perception, reasoning, and relentless curiosity, was the only hope of discovering the truth. In the quiet that followed, Jackson reviewed the scene in his mind. The food had been normal, the atmosphere controlled, the advisors acting without malice. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the Queen had collapsed. His instincts told him that the answer lay not in attack or conspiracy, but in something intrinsic, something invisible, something no alien had yet considered. And if he was right, the implications would be extraordinary, not just for the Queen, but for humans in the galaxy. For once, humans might not just serve the Empire, they might change it. As the first of the delegates left the throne room, whispering rumors about assassination and curses, Jackson remained still, his gaze fixed on the chamber where the Queen rested. He could almost feel the pulse of life there, fragile yet stubborn, waiting for understanding, waiting for a solution. He made a silent promise: he would uncover the truth. The aliens might scoff, they might threaten, they might dismiss him entirely. But humans had survived far worse than skepticism from superior species. And sometimes, survival meant noticing what everyone else missed. Jackson's thoughts turned toward the days ahead. He would watch the Queen, track her meals, her environment, her interactions. He would notice every subtle change, every unexplained tremor. He would question the assumptions of those around him. The aliens valued obedience, humans valued discovery. And in the heart of the Xerac Empire, that difference might become a matter of life and death. The chamber was emptying, the tension slowly dissipating, yet the mystery remained. Jackson straightened his uniform, adjusted his stance, and prepared himself for the investigation to come. Somewhere in the grand, ordered halls, a truth awaited him, a truth that no alien mind had predicted, that no protocol could explain. And when he found it, everything would change. The Queen's health, the Empire's understanding of humans, and perhaps the entire galaxy itself, would never be the same. He inhaled slowly, feeling the faint vibration of the ship beneath his feet, and stepped forward, ready to observe, to learn, to act. The heart of the Empire had faltered, and the answer lay with him. A human, underestimated, unnoticed, yet utterly capable of seeing what the mighty Xerac could not. The Queen's private chambers were quiet now, bathed in soft, luminescent light that seemed to hum with the ship's energy. The medics continued their monitoring, keeping a careful watch over every heartbeat, every pulse, and every irregular flicker of her eyes. The courtiers outside whispered endlessly about conspiracies, assassins, and curses, but inside only the faint hiss of the monitoring systems and the quiet movement of the Queen herself broke the silence. Jackson Cole, human guard, stood near the door, arms crossed, his eyes scanning every detail. He had learned to trust observation over speculation. While the aliens relied on tradition, ceremony, and instinct honed by centuries, humans had survived by noticing patterns, by asking questions others never thought to ask, and by daring to challenge assumptions. The first step was understanding. Jackson observed the queen carefully, noting her breathing, her posture, the subtle tension in her scales. It was unlike any heart condition he had ever studied in humans or aliens, and he suspected that the answer would not be found in medicine alone. His instincts told him that the collapse was not caused by poison, attack, or disease, but by something else, something subtle, something overlooked. Humans often succeeded where others failed because they asked why relentlessly, noticing details that others dismissed. That would be his tool here. He began with her routine. The queen's schedule was precise, almost obsessive. Meals were prepared exactly at the same intervals, rituals performed to the second, and interactions carefully controlled. Jackson watched the medics as they followed their protocols, checking nutrient balances, adjusting oxygen levels, recording every detail on holographic screens. But humans could see patterns where machines and instinct alone could not. He noticed a subtle shift in the queen's expression whenever certain foods were presented. Nothing extreme, nothing alarming, just a slight flicker of discomfort, almost imperceptible. The medics ignored it, but Jackson's eyes caught it immediately. He took note. The meal that preceded her collapse had been a delicate, rare dish of synthesized proteins designed to replicate flavors from alien worlds. The medics had verified its safety, tested it for toxins, and confirmed there was no contamination. And yet the queen had collapsed immediately afterward. Jackson pondered it. He knew that sometimes reactions were not chemical but physiological, caused by an organism's innate biology. He had seen such things in humans. Could it be possible that the queen's body reacted unpredictably to something that was normally harmless? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound behind him. One of the younger courtiers, a Gerak female named Litha, hesitated at the entrance. She was unusual. Unlike most of the advisors who carried themselves with rigid pride, she had a faint curiosity in her eyes, a subtle questioning nature that Jackson found familiar. "You are studying her closely," she said in a voice that was cautious yet not hostile. "Do you understand what happened? The medics cannot." "It is not like any collapse I have seen before. I do not think it is poison or attack. Something about her physiology caused it, but I cannot yet determine what. Patterns, small changes, details that seem irrelevant. Sometimes those details are the key." Over the next several hours, Jackson began his observation. He recorded the queen's meals, noting precisely what she consumed, the time of consumption, and her reactions. He monitored her environment, temperature, light, humidity, even the subtle vibrations in the ship's hull. He watched her interactions with medics, advisors, and the occasional messenger. The queen, weak but recovering, often closed her eyes during these moments, her breathing slow and deliberate. And yet, Jackson noticed something the others did not. Whenever he approached her chambers, the queen's pulse subtly quickened, not dramatically, just enough to register on his careful instruments. This small, almost imperceptible change puzzled him. Could the presence of a human actually affect her physiology? That idea seemed impossible, yet he could not ignore the evidence. Human biology was adaptable in ways the aliens did not understand. Human senses, instincts, and subtle cues could trigger responses in unexpected ways. He recalled incidents from his training, how humans had survived in alien ecosystems, thriving in places where species far stronger and faster had perished simply because humans observed, adapted, and acted in ways others did not anticipate. He decided to test it. Quietly, carefully, he arranged the queen's monitoring systems to track responses during controlled interactions. He observed from a distance, moving closer and farther, noting every small fluctuation in her heartbeat, every subtle change in her breathing, every flicker of discomfort in her eyes. Slowly, a pattern emerged. When he was near, her heart rate increased slightly, her breathing changed. When he was farther away, she seemed more stable. Jackson's mind raced. The implications were extraordinary. Could it be possible that humans, his species, produced some kind of chemical or pheromone that affected alien physiology? Such a thing was beyond their science, beyond their understanding, yet the evidence was undeniable. He had always known that humans were underestimated. That was how they survived. The aliens considered themselves superior in every way, yet here in the heart of their empire, human biology might hold a unique, unintended influence over even the most powerful alien in the galaxy. But Jackson also understood the danger. If he revealed this too soon, the court might panic. They could interpret it as a threat, as a weapon. Humans were not meant to be agents of influence here, and yet, inadvertently, he might already be one. He had to proceed with caution. Observation alone would not suffice. He needed to confirm the cause, understand the mechanism, and find a solution before anyone suspected the truth. Over the following days, Jackson meticulously recorded the Queen's interactions with every person in her chambers. He noted which medics handled her, which advisors approached, and which routines seemed to trigger responses. Nothing caused the reaction consistently except his own proximity. It was subtle, easily overlooked, but consistent. He reviewed the data again and again, adjusting his observations, ruling out alternative explanations. His human persistence, patience, and logical thinking allowed him to notice what the aliens could not. A simple, almost invisible biological reaction to his presence. Meanwhile, rumors continued to swirl through the court. Some whispered of assassination attempts, others speculated about curses from rival planets. The alien medics and advisors were frustrated, unable to explain the collapse scientifically. They began to worry, not for the Queen alone, but for their reputations. No Xerac had ever failed to understand or control a situation so completely. The pressure mounted, and the Queen herself seemed anxious, though she remained regal and composed. Jackson realized he had to act carefully. He began designing small, controlled tests. He would approach and withdraw, measure changes, and experiment without alarming anyone. Using the ship's technology, he tracked the Queen's heart rate, breathing, and subtle changes in her coloration. Every pattern confirmed his suspicion. The Queen's condition was triggered by something intrinsic, something invisible, something outside the understanding of even the most advanced alien science. Late one evening, after the court had retired and the chambers were silent except for the soft hum of the ship, Jackson sat near the Queen's quarters, reviewing his observations. His mind worked rapidly, connecting dots others would have missed. Humans had survived because they looked beyond appearances, noticed small anomalies, and adapted to them. That same logic applied here. The Queen's collapse was not a mystery of technology, medicine, or attack. It was a problem of biology, and the solution lay not in alien science, but in human observation and reasoning. Jackson felt a flicker of anticipation. For the first time, he realized the full significance of his discovery. Humans were underestimated, dismissed as primitive and fragile. Yet here, his species, unique biology, and the capacity to notice subtle patterns might determine the life of the most powerful being in the galaxy. The stakes were high, but the path was clear. Observation, patience, and reasoning would reveal the truth. Humans had always turned weaknesses into strengths, disadvantages into survival. Perhaps now, in the heart of the Xerac Empire, those same qualities would save a life and show the galaxy what humans were truly capable of. He rose and moved silently through the corridors, his mind mapping possibilities. There were dangers, certainly. If the court discovered what he had found, they might panic. They might try to remove him, fearing human influence over their queen. Yet he could not ignore what he had seen. The Queen's collapse had been a puzzle no alien mind could solve, and he now held a clue, subtle, almost invisible, but undeniable. It was his responsibility to uncover the full truth, quietly, carefully, before anyone else suspected what was happening. As he paused outside the Queen's door, he felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. Humans thrived in situations where others faltered. They survived because they saw what others could not, acted where others hesitated, and adapted where others failed. That same human ingenuity now might determine the life of an alien monarch. Jackson understood the weight of his role. Failure was not an option. The chambers ahead were quiet, yet full of hidden truths. He would watch, measure, and analyze. He would continue his careful, secret investigation, uncovering the reasons behind the Queen's mysterious collapse. And when he found the answer, it would not only save her life, but also reveal the extraordinary capabilities of humanity. Capabilities the Xerac Empire had never imagined. For now, Jackson remained patient, his mind sharp, his senses alert. The mystery was only beginning to unfold, and he was ready. The Queen had survived her first collapse, but the truth of why it had happened was still out there, waiting to be discovered. And Jackson Cole, human guard, was determined to uncover it. Jackson had spent days observing the Queen from the shadows, recording every subtle reaction and comparing them with the strict schedule of her life. Every gesture, every breath, every blink of her sharp, glimmering eyes became data in his mind. Nothing was too small to notice. The medics, though highly trained, relied on tools and tradition. Jackson relied on instinct and careful observation, qualities that had always kept humans alive in situations far worse than an alien court. Late one evening, when the corridors were quiet and the hum of the ship was the only sound, Jackson sat near the Queen's quarters, reviewing his notes. He could see patterns emerging that others could not. The Queen's heart rate, the subtle flaring of her scales, and the slight tension in her claws all increased in correlation with something that no alien could measure: his own proximity. Jackson's heart raced, not with fear but with recognition. This was extraordinary. The aliens had never imagined that human biology could interact with theirs in such a direct way. It made no sense in their science, but the evidence was undeniable. The Queen's collapse had been triggered by something intrinsic, something invisible, something no one had yet considered. His presence, or perhaps something in his human biology, seemed to affect her physiology. He began designing controlled experiments, small and careful, to confirm his suspicion. First, he observed her from different distances, noting every minor change in her breathing and heart rate. Then he altered his routine. He entered at slightly different times, changed his pace of movement, and varied his position in the room. Each change produced predictable results. When he was closer, her heart rate increased slightly, her breathing became more rapid. When he withdrew, her body relaxed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to Jackson it was clear. The Queen's body reacted to humans in a way the aliens had never recorded or studied. She was not allergic, she was not poisoned, and she was not under attack. Her collapse had been accidental, triggered by a biological response no one had understood. The next step was to understand the mechanism. Jackson reviewed everything he knew about human and alien biology. Humans emitted pheromones, chemicals invisible to the eye, capable of triggering responses in other humans and apparently in alien species. Perhaps the Queen's body had evolved in a way that made it unusually sensitive to these chemicals. Perhaps it was an accident of evolution. Either way, it explained the collapse. Humans had survived in unpredictable environments because they noticed what others overlooked. Now that same quality, adaptation and observation, could save the life of the most powerful being in the galaxy. Jackson had to be careful. Revealing this discovery prematurely could have disastrous consequences. The court might panic, seeing humans as a threat. The Queen's advisors might attempt to isolate him or remove him entirely. And yet, he could not ignore the truth. The Queen's health, the future of the Empire, and perhaps the perception of humans in the galaxy depended on him. He needed to confirm the cause fully before taking any further steps. He began monitoring the Queen during her interactions with other humans. There were very few aboard the capital ship, but those present, messengers, aides, and minor guards, were discreetly observed. Jackson noted every subtle change in the Queen's heart rate, breathing, and coloration. None of the other humans produced the reaction he had detected in himself. It was unique, specific, and unmistakable. Somehow his own biology triggered a response in her physiology that no other human did. Jackson realized the implications. Humans were underestimated, dismissed as weak and primitive. Yet here, his species' unique biology combined with observation, logic, and adaptation had revealed a vulnerability in a being that no alien could control. This was not weakness, it was a difference. And differences, he knew from human history, could be powerful tools when understood and used wisely. He needed more data. Carefully, he arranged a controlled session where he would enter the Queen's chamber and remain at a measured distance, while medics recorded every heartbeat, every breath, every tremor in her claws. He approached slowly, aware that even a minor misstep could alter the readings. The Queen, weak but recovering, watched him with those sharp, intelligent eyes, and Jackson met her gaze without fear. He had learned long ago that confidence and calm could communicate more than words ever could. As he entered the room, the monitors picked up the familiar changes. Heart rate increased, scales flared slightly, breathing became shallower. Jackson noted every detail. Then he withdrew, stepping back carefully. Immediately, the Queen's body relaxed. The results were clear. His presence, or something unique to his biology, influenced her physiological response. The pattern could not be denied. For the first time, Jackson considered the bigger picture. Humans had survived not because they were stronger or faster, but because they observed, adapted, and reasoned. Here, on a ship that represented centuries of alien dominance, that same ability had revealed a vulnerability that no one else could detect. If understood and managed carefully, it could not only save the Queen, but also elevate the perception of humans in the eyes of the Xerac Empire. Jackson needed a solution. Observation alone was not enough. The Queen's health had to be protected. He began brainstorming ways to minimize the physiological reaction. Perhaps if he maintained a certain distance or used barriers to block chemical signals, the reaction could be controlled. Perhaps the aliens' technology could be adapted to create a temporary buffer. He would need to experiment carefully and quietly to find the safest approach. Days passed. Jackson continued his secret observations, meticulously recording every detail. The Queen's condition remained stable, but the underlying vulnerability persisted. Every minor interaction, every meal, every routine held potential risk. Yet Jackson was patient. Humans had survived against impossible odds by being patient, careful, and relentless. He would find the answer. He had too. One evening, as he reviewed his notes, Lither approached again. She had been observing him quietly, curious but cautious. "You spend so much time watching her," she said. "Do you really understand what you are looking for?" Her collapse was not caused by attack or illness. It was caused by something intrinsic in her biology, something that interacts with mine. I need to confirm it fully and then find a way to prevent it. If the court finds out too soon, they may react poorly. But if I succeed, the Queen's life can be saved, and humans may be seen in a new light. She nodded slightly and stepped away, leaving him to his work. Jackson returned to his observations, refining his methods. He experimented with distance, timing, and positioning. He noted minor changes in the Queen's skin tone, heartbeat, and breathing, all corresponding to his presence. He began to hypothesize that the cause was chemical, a pheromone or biological signal unique to humans that triggered an unintended response in her physiology. The aliens had never considered such a possibility. Their understanding of life was based on predictability, control, and dominance. Humans thrived precisely because they defied predictability, adapted to change, and used reasoning to find solutions where others saw only chaos. Finally, Jackson devised a controlled experiment. Using the ship's technology, he created a barrier that could filter air and block chemical signals. He positioned himself at a measured distance behind the barrier while the Queen consumed her meals and engaged in her routine. The results were immediate and undeniable. Her heart rate remained steady, her breathing normal, and her scales retained their usual coloration. The hypothesis was confirmed. His human biology had been triggering her collapse, and by controlling exposure, the effect could be neutralized. Jackson exhaled quietly. This was a breakthrough. He had discovered the cause of the Queen's mysterious collapse, a phenomenon no alien had ever understood, and found a practical solution. The next challenge would be presenting it without alarming the court or causing panic. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Observation, patience, and human ingenuity had solved a problem centuries of alien knowledge could not. He knew the work was not finished. The Queen's health would require careful monitoring, and the solution would need to be implemented discreetly. But he had taken the first step. Humans, underestimated and dismissed, had revealed a truth the Xerac Empire could not ignore. Jackson felt a surge of pride, not arrogance, but the quiet confidence that comes from understanding and capability. This was the essence of humanity: observation, adaptation, and the courage to act where others hesitated. As he left the chamber that night, the ship quiet around him, Jackson understood the significance of his discovery. The Queen's life had been saved by a human's careful observation and reasoning. The Empire had yet to learn it, but humans were no longer just bystanders. Their biology, their intelligence, and their relentless curiosity had proven valuable in ways no one could have predicted. And soon, the truth would emerge, reshaping perceptions and redefining what humans were capable of in a galaxy that had long underestimated them. Jackson paused at a corridor junction, looking back at the faint glow of the Queen's chambers. She rested peacefully, unaware of the discovery that had safeguarded her. He smiled faintly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on his shoulders. The story was far from over. The court would soon notice changes, and he would need to guide them carefully. But for now, he had achieved something remarkable. Humans, quiet, unassuming, and often underestimated, had proven that their greatest strength was not in weapons or technology, but in their mind, their observation, and their ability to adapt. The journey ahead would be challenging. He would need to manage perceptions, protect the Queen, and continue refining his understanding. But Jackson Cole, human guard, was ready. Humans had survived worse than skepticism and fear. And in the heart of the Gerak Empire, he had begun to prove that their ingenuity, patience, and careful reasoning could overcome even the most impossible mysteries. Jackson moved through the ship's corridors with quiet determination. Each step was measured, each glance deliberate. The discovery he had made was extraordinary, yet fragile. One wrong move, one careless word, and the delicate balance between the Queen's safety and the court's perception of humans could collapse. He had confirmed that his presence triggered physiological changes in the Queen, and that controlling exposure could stabilize her. But evidence alone would not convince the Gerak. They demanded proof in their own terms, and Jackson had to translate his human reasoning into their alien logic. He started by designing a controlled demonstration. The Queen, having recovered from her initial collapse, was alert and composed. Medics monitored her closely, their instruments silently recording every heartbeat, every subtle change in scale coloration, every tremor. Jackson carefully placed barriers in the room, transparent shields designed to filter air and block any possible pheromones or chemical signals. He positioned himself behind one of these shields at a measured distance while the Queen performed her usual routines. The results were immediate. Her heart rate remained stable, her breathing calm, her body relaxed. Jackson noted every detail meticulously. When he stepped closer without the shield, subtle changes returned, slight increases in heart rate, minor tremors in her claws, a faint tension in her scales. When he retreated behind the shield, everything returned to normal. He repeated this several times, varying the distance, and the results were consistent. Litha watched from a distance, her eyes wide with fascination. She had been skeptical at first, but even she could see the pattern. "It is undeniable," she whispered to herself, almost afraid to speak. Humans, she realized, could see things differently. They noticed subtle patterns and anomalies that the most advanced Gerak minds overlooked. Jackson made careful notes. The Queen's reaction was triggered only by his presence, or more accurately, by something in his biology that the Gerak had never considered. The court's most powerful advisors had dismissed him, viewing humans as simple and weak, yet here he was, revealing a truth that even centuries of alien science could not explain. He felt a quiet pride, tempered by caution. This was not the time for celebration, it was the time for careful action. The next day, he arranged a private audience with the Queen's most trusted advisors. They were tense, skeptical, and proud, but Jackson approached with calm authority. "I have discovered the cause of the Queen's collapse," he began. "It is not attack, poison, or illness. It is something intrinsic in her physiology, triggered by exposure to certain human biological signals. Using protective barriers and measured distance, her condition can be stabilized. She can resume her duties without risk." Jackson waited patiently, allowing them to process the information. Humans had survived in dangerous situations by being patient, by observing, and by reasoning. Argument, evidence, and demonstration were far more persuasive than words alone. Litha stepped forward. "I have observed the experiment," she said quietly. "The results are consistent. The Queen's stability changes in correlation with his proximity. It is not illusion, it is real." Jackson explained further. "Humans have survived in unpredictable environments because we notice subtle patterns, adapt, and act logically where others might hesitate. This same principle has allowed me to identify a condition that no Gerak science could predict. By understanding the pattern and controlling exposure, the Queen's life can be safeguarded. Unpredictability can be dangerous if ignored, but it can be managed if understood. Humans are not threats, they are tools of understanding. This is a problem, yes, but it is solvable, and I have solved it. The evidence is convincing. We cannot deny the data. This human's method has identified a risk no Gerak science could predict and a solution to it. The Queen can live safely if these measures are followed." He returned to the Queen's chamber to explain the plan. She regarded him with her sharp, intelligent eyes, her expression calm but curious. Jackson spoke simply, carefully. "Your Majesty, I have discovered why your heart collapsed. It is not poison or attack. Something in my presence triggers a response in your physiology. I have found a way to manage it, using protective barriers and controlled distance. You can live without risk. We can control it, so you can continue your duties without risk of collapse. Yet here his species' greatest qualities, observation, reasoning, patience, and adaptability, had saved the life of an alien monarch. The Queen's recognition was subtle but meaningful. Over the following days, Jackson implemented the solution. Protective barriers were placed in key locations, protocols adjusted to manage exposure, and medics trained to monitor subtle changes. The Queen resumed her duties, her health stabilized, her body no longer at risk of sudden collapse. The court, initially skeptical, began to recognize the value of human insight. While humans were still considered outsiders, they were no longer dismissed as irrelevant. Jackson continued to observe, refine, and adjust the measures. Each day, he noted minor improvements, small efficiencies that made the Queen's life safer and her court more stable. His quiet diligence earned respect from younger advisors and medics, who began to see humans not as primitive creatures, but as beings capable of insight and problem-solving beyond their understanding. Even the Queen, now fully recovered, occasionally nodded at him with quiet acknowledgement. It was a silent recognition of the truth she had discovered, that humans, underestimated and often ignored, possessed qualities the Gerak had never valued. Observation, reasoning, and adaptability, human traits, could achieve what centuries of alien science could not. Jackson reflected on the broader implications. Humans were not just survivors. They were innovators, problem-solvers, and thinkers capable of understanding patterns invisible to others. The Empire had underestimated them for centuries, yet here, at the heart of their power, a human had revealed a truth that changed everything. The Queen's collapse had been a crisis, but it had also been an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate the remarkable capabilities of humanity. For Jackson, the work was not finished. He would continue to observe, refine, and protect. Humans had survived in far more dangerous situations than the skepticism of alien courtiers. Patience, careful reasoning, and observation would continue to guide him. And in doing so, he would ensure that humans were no longer merely bystanders in the galaxy, but participants, capable, valuable, and extraordinary. The Empire slowly adjusted to the new understanding. The Queen's health remained stable, her duties uninterrupted, and the court began to acknowledge the quiet power of human observation. Jackson's methods, subtle and patient, had proven their value. The truth of humanity's capability was becoming clear. Humans were not just guests in the galaxy. They were problem-solvers, thinkers, and survivors capable of altering the course of events in ways the Gerak had never imagined. Jackson felt a quiet satisfaction as he watched the Queen resume her duties, confident and strong. His discovery had safeguarded her life, stabilized the court, and demonstrated the extraordinary potential of humans. The journey had been careful and deliberate, but the results were undeniable. Observation, reasoning, and adaptability, the hallmarks of humanity, had triumphed where even advanced alien science had failed. As he stood silently in the corner, the Queen's chamber alive with the subtle rhythms of life and duty, Jackson realized that this was only the beginning. Humans had survived by noticing what others overlooked, by adapting to chaos, and by acting with intelligence where others hesitated. Now in the heart of the Gerak Empire, those qualities had not only saved a life but had begun to reshape perceptions of an entire species. The Queen, aware of her restored strength and the invisible hand that had guided it, regarded Jackson with quiet respect. It was a small acknowledgement, subtle but powerful. The humans aboard the ship, once dismissed, were no longer irrelevant. They had proven that intelligence, observation, and careful reasoning could change outcomes in ways the Gerak had never anticipated. Jackson, quietly proud yet humble, knew the importance of continued diligence. Humanity's greatest qualities had been recognized, and the Empire had learned at last to value what humans could offer. The journey of understanding was ongoing, but the first steps had been taken. And for the first time, the Gerak would see humans not as weak outsiders, but as extraordinary beings capable of insights beyond imagination. The Queen's chamber was calm, almost serene, as Jackson watched from his assigned post. The subtle hum of the ship filled the space, a steady reminder of the immense power and complexity of the Gerak Empire. Outside the chamber, the court had resumed its usual activities, though whispers lingered in the corridors. Some were astonished at what had occurred, others skeptical, but all had begun to recognize a new truth. Humans were no longer merely bystanders in a galaxy ruled by alien authority. Jackson had spent weeks carefully implementing his solution. Protective barriers had been installed, air filtration adjusted, and monitoring protocols refined to ensure the Queen's safety. The results had been undeniable. She had resumed her duties without incident. Her heart no longer faltered, her scales no longer flickered with stress, and her breathing remained steady. It was the success of careful observation, human reasoning, and persistence, qualities the Gerak had long overlooked. The Queen herself seemed to sense the significance of the change. She moved through her court with renewed strength, her voice steady, her decisions precise. But when she glanced toward Jackson, there was something more, a quiet acknowledgement, a subtle recognition that the human guard had played a critical role in preserving not only her life, but the stability of the Empire itself. Jackson observed her, noting the calm confidence in her movements. Humans were often underestimated, dismissed as fragile or simple. Yet here he realized those same humans had proven that intelligence, patience, and careful reasoning could succeed where even advanced alien science had failed. He had saved the life of a monarch, not with weapons, not with technology, but with the tools humans relied on most: observation, logic, and persistence. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The Queen's sudden collapse had thrown the court into chaos, the medics at a loss, and the advisors into panic. Rumors of assassination, poison, and curses had spread like wildfire. But Jackson had remained calm, relying on human intuition and analytical thinking to identify a cause that no alien had ever considered. Something intrinsic in the Queen's physiology, triggered by subtle human biological signals, had caused her collapse. He had confirmed the phenomenon, devised a method to control it, and implemented it successfully. The implications were profound. The Gerak, proud and disciplined, had long considered themselves the pinnacle of intelligence and science. Yet a human, thought weak, unremarkable, and subordinate, had discovered a truth that had eluded centuries of study. Jackson had demonstrated that humans possessed qualities the Gerak could not measure or replicate: adaptability, perception, and reasoning in complex, unpredictable situations. It was a quiet victory, but a victory nonetheless. The Queen called him forward for a private audience, her gaze sharp and unwavering. Jackson stepped into the chamber, alert but composed. She regarded him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the weight of her authority and the acknowledgement of what he had achieved. "You have done more than I expected," she said softly. "Not through force, not through strategy, but through understanding. You have saved my life, and perhaps the stability of my empire. That is remarkable for a human. You have done more than you know. The court will remember this, though perhaps not in full. Humans will no longer be seen as weak or insignificant. You have shown them the power of patience, observation, and intelligence." It was a victory not only for himself, but for all of humanity, a reminder that sometimes the greatest power lay not in strength or technology, but in the mind. The court slowly began to recognize his contributions. Younger advisors, once dismissive, now watched him with curiosity and respect. Medics, initially skeptical, consulted him quietly, recognizing the precision and insight of his observations. Even some older, conservative figures nodded in acknowledgement, unable to deny the evidence before them. Humans, they realized, were capable of insights that even the most disciplined Gerak could not achieve. In the following weeks, Jackson continued his work, refining the protective measures, adjusting protocols, and monitoring the Queen discreetly. The barriers and air filtration systems remained in place, ensuring no accidental exposure could trigger another collapse. The Queen moved through her duties with confidence, her body stable, her mind clear. The Empire itself seemed to shift subtly, acknowledging the value of human ingenuity without fully understanding it. Jackson found himself reflecting on the larger significance. Humans had survived countless challenges across history, thriving in unpredictable environments where strength alone was insufficient. Observation, adaptability, and reasoning had always been their tools. Here, aboard the capital ship of the Gerak Empire, those same tools had revealed a vulnerability, devised a solution, and secured the life of the most powerful being in the galaxy. It was proof, if any were needed, that humanity's greatest weapon was not technology or numbers, but intelligence, insight, and perseverance. One evening, as the Queen reviewed diplomatic reports with her advisors, Jackson observed quietly from the corner. Her body remained steady, her mind focused, and her authority unquestioned. He realized that his work, though subtle, had ensured not only her survival but the continued stability of the Empire. Humanity had not merely intervened, It had contributed something invaluable: knowledge, reasoning, and the ability to solve problems no alien could predict. Lither approached him quietly. "You have changed how they see humans," she said softly. "Not openly, not through force, but by revealing what your kind can do. They may never admit it fully, but they know now that you are extraordinary." The immediate danger was resolved, the Queen's health secured, and humans had earned a quiet respect in a world that had long dismissed them. Yet he also understood that vigilance must continue. Observation, reasoning, and adaptability were not one-time tools. They were lifelong habits. And for humanity in a galaxy that underestimated them, such habits would remain essential. The Queen, having been briefed discreetly by Jackson on the measures he had implemented, expressed her gratitude privately. "You have done more than save my life," she said. "You have revealed the value of your species in ways I could never have imagined. The Empire will remember, quietly, and perhaps one day, humans will take their rightful place as equals in thought and insight." Observation, reasoning, patience, and adaptability, human qualities often overlooked, had altered the course of events in ways no one else could achieve. As the days passed, Jackson continued his duties, guarding the Queen and observing quietly. The court adapted to the changes he had introduced, following his protocols without fully understanding the reasoning behind them. The Queen remained stable, her body no longer vulnerable to collapse. Diplomacy proceeded, treaties were signed, and the Empire regained its rhythm. Yet the true victory was subtle, invisible to most: the recognition of human capability. Humans had survived and thrived in a universe that often sought to ignore them. They had solved a problem no alien science could explain. They had safeguarded the life of a monarch, stabilized an empire, and demonstrated that intelligence, reasoning, and observation were powers of the highest order. Jackson reflected on the journey. From the moment the Queen collapsed to the quiet moments of careful observation, to the controlled experiments and the implementation of protective measures, humans had proven their worth. Not through force, not through weapons, but through insight, patience, and adaptability. And in that realization, Jackson felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Humanity had survived the impossible, thrived where others faltered, and shown its unique value to a galaxy that had long underestimated it. The Queen, once vulnerable, was now strong. The court, once skeptical, had begun to respect humans. And Jackson Cole, quiet, observant, and resilient, had ensured that humanity's greatest qualities had been recognized, not through show of strength, but through intelligence, insight, and care. As he stood silently in the Queen's chamber one last time that day, Jackson allowed himself a small smile. Humans had survived worse than skepticism and disbelief. They had turned weakness into strength, unpredictability into insight, and curiosity into solutions. And now, in the heart of the Xerac Empire, that same ingenuity had triumphed. The Queen glanced at him, her gaze steady and unwavering. It was a look of recognition, gratitude, and quiet respect. Jackson nodded subtly. The work was complete, the immediate crisis resolved, and humanity had proven itself once again. Observation, patience, reasoning, and adaptability had won the day. And in the vast, ordered expanse of the Xerac Empire, the galaxy began to see what humans had always known: that their greatest strength was not in weapons, technology, or sheer force, but in their minds, their insight, and their unyielding determination to notice what others overlooked and act wisely. For Jackson, for the Queen, and for humanity, the future was now a little brighter, a little safer, and a little more aware of what humans were truly capable of.